We have with us Mr. Laurie Milwata from CREA. जैसा कि आपको बताया कि CREA Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air है. This is an independent research organization which focuses on revealing trends, causes, and health impacts, as well as uh, they've also proposed solutions to air pollution. Laurie के अलावा we also have Mr. Zubair Abro, who is an advocate of the High Court and he practices in Sindh. इनकी जो मेजर लिटिगेशन है, he works on environmental issues, or he is currently representing and affiliated with Alternatives Lawyers Collective, which is an organization of lawyers that works on environmental issues and strategic litigation related to environmental issues. And they also are willing to expand on other issues as well. We also have Mr. Muhammad Ali Shah Saab from Pakistan Fisher Folk Forum. Shah Saab is a veteran activist and organizer. He is from Sindh. He works on environmental issues and water-related issues in Sindh. My name is Ramesh Sohail. I am an advocate practicing in Punjab, especially based from out of Lahore. My focus is environmental issues and other human rights related issues. I am also affiliated with the Alternative Lawyers Collective. So before moving on, I would like to clear some rules so that we can have a more smooth running of the session today. The voice control of the entire session would lay with the hosts, and so आप सबके जो mics हैं वो हमने बंद किए हुए हैं. जिनकी presentation होगी उनका mic unmute होगा ताकि कोई disturbance बीच में ना आए. Each speaker will have an allotted time in which they will be speaking. और इनकी जो स्पीच है वो हमने ऑलरेडी प्री रिकॉर्ड की हुई है सो दैट नोबडी फेसेस एनी कनेक्टिविटी इश्यूज व्हाइल दिस इज हैपनिंग. इसके अलावा ये कि जो इनकी रिकॉर्डिंग है वो तो है ही है, बट द प्रेजेंटर्स आर देमसेल्व्स प्रेजेंट इन द सेशन टुडे, so that if you have any comments or questions, they will be able to answer those after the presentations are over. If any of the participants wish to speak, so they can let us know through the chat option, and after the session is over, after the question session is over, we can give the floor to you and you will be given 2 minutes to make your point. As I already said earlier, I would like to ask you to send in your introductions and email addresses so that we can share the press release with you and also send you the report if you wanted, the study that we are launching today. Before wasting any more time, I would like to introduce Mr. Laurie Milwata, who is going to give us a presentation on the key findings in the study.
Hello, everyone. I'm Laurie, the lead analyst for the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, a new global research organization focused on analyzing the trends, the sources, and the solutions of air pollution around the world. I've worked on a study on the planned coal expansion in the Thar region in Pakistan in light of the very large expansion of emissions that it would entail. The reason why we're concerned about the development of energy and emissions in Pakistan is that the country is already among the world's most polluted countries, according to a global ranking by IQ Air, the second most polluted country in terms of average PM 2.5 levels. And PM 2.5 particulate matter pollution, according to a range of authoritative global studies, is the largest environmental killer in the world and in Pakistan. The World Health Organization officially classifies it as a carcinogen and has called it a leading environmental cause of cancer deaths worldwide. And right now, of course, when we're in the middle of a global pandemic, an important concern is that air pollution increases the vulnerability of exposed people to the COVID-19 disease. Pakistan, as many of you know, is also in the midst of a very rapid expansion in coal-fired power generation. Almost all of the currently operated capacity was commissioned just in the past 3 years, and a further doubling of coal-fired capacity is in the pipeline, looking at proposed and under construction projects. More than half of these new plant projects are in the Thar region, where one of the largest clusters of coal-fired power plants in South Asia is being planned. And if this expansion is realized, it would become one of the biggest hotspots of air pollutant and mercury and carbon dioxide emissions in South Asia. Another reason for concern is that in the areas where this expansion is being planned, the current pollution levels already before the coal-fired power plants are in operation are extremely high. They are 2 to 3 times as high as the Pakistani environmental quality standards, and up to 10 times as high as the World Health Organization guidelines. And this is based on information reported in the environmental impact assessments prepared by some of the project proponents themselves. Oddly, this concern seems to have been completely brushed aside. There is no rationale for how you can justify major new emission sources in areas that already suffer from pollution that is far above legal standards. As part of this project, we also went through the environmental impact assessments that were available. Preparing an environmental impact assessment is obviously a key legal requirement for obtaining the permits and building projects with major emissions and environmental implications, such as coal-fired power plants. A couple of striking things about these assessments were that first, they claim to comply with international standards, namely the World Bank International Finance Corporation guidelines for emissions. But the limits that they apply are limits for so-called non-degraded areas, which these clearly are not, because they are in violation of the key air quality standards. So this statement about complying with International Finance Corporation standards is completely false and misleading. Another major thing that stood out was one of the environmental impact assessments underreported mercury emissions about 20 times. A very dramatic understatement of emissions, and it seems that this environmental impact assessment was just paused.
Okay, I'm being told that the video quality is fine, but the audio is a little low, so I'm going to play it in a different player.
Misleading and false bits of information in just those parts of the environmental impact assessments that we scrutinized seriously raised the question of what is the level of scrutiny? Are the permitting authorities reading these documents? Are they in fact executing any independent scrutiny, or are these just being rubber stamped as they come in? And for a country that is in the midst of a massive expansion of its coal-fired power capacity, lacking that oversight and lacking that scrutiny, that the institutional framework to oversee this expansion is very alarming. So in the absence of proper environmental impact assessments, we carried out a detailed study of how these planned projects in the Thar would influence air quality, how they would influence human health, and how they would influence toxics deposition in these areas. So we started by building an emissions inventory for the power plants and the associated lignite mines, using, as far as possible, data from the existing environmental impact assessments and other available documents, publicly available documents, and generalizing based on those. So for projects that didn't have data yet, we generalized from assuming that their technology and their operations are similar to the ones that have already prepared those documents. Then we carried out detailed atmospheric modeling for the emissions, taking into account the height of the stacks, the kind of emission control technology that the project proponents say they would employ, and so on, and using a full year of hourly meteorological data from the area to look at how the pollution would spread in the atmosphere and how it would affect air quality in the region. And here it's important to note that we assume that everything that is said in the environmental impact assessments is true, that all the emission limits are followed, all technologies are operated properly, and all the emission limits given in those documents are met. And if that's not the case, the impacts could be considerably worse. So then, based on these results on air quality,
just 1 second, I think काफी लोग कंप्लेन कर रहे थे कि उनको स्लाइड्स नहीं आ रही, तो अब मेरा ख्याल है स्लाइड सही आनी चाहिए.
Impacts from these projects, we then looked at the population exposure, how many people live in the different places that are affected, and then we used existing scientific studies on scientific risk models that link air pollution levels to the risk of different diseases and different health outcomes. And we combined that with data from Pakistan on the current rates of death from different causes. This is the standard approach for health impact assessment. And the results that we found are alarming. The sulfur dioxide concentrations and the particulate matter concentrations from these plants would, in the most affected areas, exceed the World Health Organization limits, even without considering any other emission sources. So even if the air was completely clean, these sources alone would cause exceedances of the World Health Organization guidelines. And of course, in reality, as mentioned, the pollution levels are already high, and the impact from these sources would come on top. But so we find that approximately 100,000 people live in areas where just these sources would cause exceedances of the World Health Organization guidelines. The other very, very alarming thing that comes out of our modeling is the risk of mercury contamination. So these plants would emit around 1,400 kilograms of mercury every year if built and operated. And once released into the air, about 1/5 of that mercury would be deposited into the area. Most of that would go into cropland, creating the risk of increased mercury levels in crops. And the levels of mercury deposition that we found in the modeling are potentially dangerous in an area with approximately 100,000 people. The cumulative health impacts from the increased level of air pollution include an estimated 29,000 premature deaths if these plants are built and operated for 30 years. They also include about 40,000 asthma emergency room visits, 3,000 new cases of asthma in children, and 29,000 preterm births, which is of course a major health risk for children. Another very significant impact is increased work absence or sick leaves, which would amount to about 20 million days in total over 30 years, so a major economic cost as well. And one really concerning thing about air pollution is that it also makes people more vulnerable to the COVID-19 disease. That's already true in Pakistan right now, that the high levels of air pollution in the country are already putting people at more risk. That's because air pollution is a major risk factor contributing to the most important pre-existing conditions that make COVID-19 more dangerous and more deadly. So, for example, for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, a respiratory disease that is a major risk factor for COVID-19, more than 1/3 of the cases of that disease are estimated to be linked with air pollution in Pakistan. For many other causes like diabetes, heart disease, stroke, it's around 10%. And it's also notable that about 1/5 of all the deaths from lower respiratory infections, not COVID-19, but the ordinary kind of respiratory infections from pneumonia and so on, 1/5 of those are attributed to air pollution. So that speaks to how much air pollution increases the risk and the vulnerability to these kinds of infections. And I just want to highlight that the trend in Pakistan of targeting a major increase in coal-fired capacity is quite strongly at odds with what's happening in many other parts of the world. So amazingly, there are more than 20 countries that have already decided to completely phase out coal-fired power, including 5 out of the 7 G7 economies, the world's leading economies. And one of the key reasons why that is happening is concerns about air pollution and the very tangible impact that air pollution is having on public health. And in some of these places, when they have closed down coal-fired power plants, they have already been able to verify the improvements in public health, like in things like the health of newborn babies and so on. The other really important driving factor in these decisions is the fact that in those countries that have systematically and ambitiously developed renewable energy, including the United States, including in China, including in India, wind and solar are already the cheapest, the most affordable form of new power generation, more affordable than coal-fired power generation. So they are helping bring down power bills and make these economies more competitive. And this is without factoring in the major public health costs, the economic burden from those public health impacts that is associated with coal. So the key findings from our study: Pakistan is already suffering from high levels of air pollution. There is a very aggressive expansion of coal-fired power that is being planned. The planned coal plants and mines in the Thar region would expose 100,000 people to exceedances of World Health Organization air quality guidelines. They would also expose approximately 100,000 people to elevated levels of mercury deposition. And if these plants are built and operated for 30 years, they would be responsible for a projected 29,000 deaths from air pollution. Based on these findings, the recommendations that we have: first of all, the environmental standards for coal-fired power plants in Pakistan are very weak. So there is an urgent need to strengthen and improve those standards and improve monitoring and enforcement of those standards. There is a very strong need to assess and take into account the costs that coal expansion would entail for Pakistan's public health and Pakistan's economy, and consider that if the future electricity needs of the country can be met with renewable energy, that would very significantly reduce those economic burdens from air pollution. And furthermore, given the significant financial burden created by the coal expansion for Pakistan's economy, for the DISCOMs, the power sector, and given the already hazardous air quality, we think there is a strong case to reevaluate and cancel the planned coal-fired power expansion, especially given that there is currently more than enough capacity to meet power demand if the current capacity is fully operated and made available. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laurie, for your presentation. You people have been sharing your comments in the chat window as well. We've already given those comments to Laurie, and he will be pleased to answer your comments or add more onto them after all the presentations are over. Ms. Hina, you've also told us that you've been working on these issues as well. So we would love to hear from you towards the end of the presentation. So if you would like to do that, please let me know. Moving on, I would like to now invite Mr. Zubair Abra, who, as I already mentioned, who is a lawyer who has already engaged himself in a lot of environmentally related cases in Thar. He is the lead counsel on the case on Guranul Dam, as well as he has also planned other litigation related to Thar coal as well. The topic that he would be discussing is legal non-compliance in coal mining and power plants in Thar. I apologize for all the technical errors. We live in Pakistan. This is part and parcel of how things are here. but we would try to improve as time goes on. I would like to apologize once again. Sorry. I would just take a few moments to set up Zubair's presentation, and then we can go from there. So we're ready for Zubair's presentation. Zubair is also present in the meeting today. So if you have any question related to the legal strategies on third coal or whatever legal questions that you have, we also have other lawyers that are part of the Alternative Law Collective, including myself. So we'd be happy to answer any environmental related questions that you have on coal.
Hello everyone. My name is Zubair Abdo. I'm a part of the legal team and lead counsel in the third petition pending before the Sindh High Court. This report is a timely reminder of exactly what is happening in Thar. And yet, let us be clear, it is only the tip of the iceberg. Misreporting and lies by the project proponents and incompetence and corruption of government officials is a standard operating procedure. While CREA has identified key features of this in its report, drawn from their own EIAs, many additional concerns around displacement, land acquisition, the destruction of vital water reserves, and a wider failure of government approval and monitoring needs to be highlighted. What the proponents, Sindh government departments, including Sindh Coal Authority, Sindh Environmental Protection Agency, Revenue Department, and Irrigation Department are doing in Thar is plunder. A white-collar corporate crime against the indigenous people of Thar and ecocide. We will continue fighting the legal battle to expose and challenge international and local corporate interests, as well as those of a corrupt and inept government. We have a number of times clarified that people of Thar are not against the development, but we cannot allow anyone to destroy ecology of Thar in name of development. दोस्तों को ये भी अर्ज करता चलूं कि इदारों की तरफ से कानून की खिलाफवर्जी का एक ताज़ा मिसाल ईद की छुट्टियों के दौरान 12 मई को कोल प्लांट्स को पानी सप्लाई की स्कीम की एनवायरमेंटल असेसमेंट पर पब्लिक हियरिंग का नोटिस देना है। इस नोटिस में कहा गया है कि अवाम एनवायरमेंटल इम्पैक्ट असेसमेंट रिपोर्ट सिंध एनवायरमेंटल प्रोटेक्शन एजेंसी की कराची और मीरपुर खास ऑफिस में जाकर पढ़ सकती है। अब जबकि दफातर ईद की छुट्टियों की वजह से बंद थे और अगर खुले भी हैं तो पब्लिक डीलिंग नहीं की जा रही। सिंध हुकूमत ने पब्लिक ट्रांसपोर्ट पे अभी तक पाबंदी बरकरार रखी हुई है और पब्लिक इज्तिमात से भी मना किया हुआ है, पर इन सब बातों को नज़रअंदाज करके पब्लिक हियरिंग करना इस पूरे अमल की शफाफियत पर सवालिया निशान डाल देता है और सिंध हुकूमत के कानून पर अमल दरामद के तमाम दावों की नफी करता है। हम सिंध हुकूमत और सिंध कोल अथॉरिटी से ये दरख्वास्त करते हैं कि इन हालात में पब्लिक हियरिंग ना की जाए और थर के लोगों की जिंदगी को खतरे में ना डाला जाए। अहिड़ी तरह ही थर में तरक़ी जे नाले ते थींदड़ फुरमाट जो एक मिसाल सुप्रीम कोर्ट जो मार्च 2017 जो ऑर्डर आहे जंहिंमें तफ़सील सां बयानु कयो वियो त सिंध कोल अथॉरिटी जे डायरेक्टर जनरल तक़रीबन 100 अरब रुपया मुख़्तलिफ़ स्कीमुनि जे नाले ते ख़र्च करे छॾिया। इहे सभु स्कीमूं सिंध कोल अथॉरिटी जे बोर्ड जी मंज़ूरी खां बग़ैर शुरू कयूं वियूं। जेको सरासर गैर कानूनी अमल हो। सुप्रीम कोर्ट जे वाज़े हुकुम बावजूद अॼु ताईं सिंध कोल अथॉरिटी जे ज़िम्मेवारनि ख़िलाफ़ कोई एक्शन न खयो वियो सवाइ कुझु बदिलियूं करण जे। ऐं जंहिं एनवायरमेंट रिपोर्ट जो मूं मथे ज़िक्र कयो, इन में किथे बि ज़िक्र न आहे त सिंध हुकूमत जे कहिड़े इदारे जी इहा स्कीम आहे। आया इहा इरिगेशन जी स्कीम आहे या सिंध कोल अथॉरिटी जी इहा रिपोर्ट में किथे बि वाज़े न आहे थियल। इहे सभु अमल सिंध हुकूमत जी तरक़ी जे दावान ते शुकूक पैदा कनि था। तरक़ी जे नाले ते थर जे माहौल, हितां जे माण्हुनि जी मालिकी ऐं गैर कानूनी अमलनि जी कंहिं बि सूरत में इजाज़त न हुजणु घुरिजे। महिरबानी।
जुबैर साहब की भी ये प्रेजेंटेशन थी जो 3 लैंग्वेजेस में थी, इंग्लिश, उर्दू एंड सिंधी में, because we also have journalists here from Sindh, we also have activists here from Sindh who would want to hear this in their language as well. Now we move on to Mr. Muhammad Ali Shah Saab's presentation. As I've already mentioned before, Shah Saab is a veteran organizer and activist from Pakistan Fisher Folk Forum. Every time we have any environmental related query, we always go to Shah Saab for advice or on how to strategize and how to act. Shah Saab will be giving his concluding remarks on the issue of third coal as well as the study launched by Laurie. I would like to take a few minutes to set up his presentation as well. All those new people who have just joined us, if you could please send us your brief intro as well as your contact details, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, we're all good to go. This is our presentation from Muhammad Ali Shah Saab.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. और मेरी तरफ से सबको सलाम. First of all, I would like to thankful and appreciate to Larry and his organization, Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air. I think that he has conducted an eye-opener study on air quality, health and toxic impacts of the proposed coal mining and coal power plants in Thar. This study will be very helpful to our campaign against coal mining and coal power plants, as well as struggle for the climate justice and promote the clean energy. This study has revealed that Thar will be the hot spot in the South Asia due to air pollutant, mercury, and carbon dioxide emissions from the coal power plants. Nari has already explained the findings of the study very well, so I don't want to make the repetition, but only say that coal mining and coal power plants will destroy the natural beauty of Thar. And it is also fact that indigenous people of Thar will face dirty and harmful energy projects, which will impact on health and safety, livelihoods, homes, food production, systems, water, environment, and ecology. Dear comrades, I would say that dirty and harmful energy leads to massive displacement, illness, and disease, loss of means of livelihoods, loss of lives, loss of biodiversity, destruction of natural resources, deepening of poverty, and destroying ways of life of people of Thar. दोस्तों साथियों, ये हकीकत है कि अब दुनिया में मुतअद्दिद ममालिक कोयले से बिजली पैदा करने से दस्तबरदार हो रहे हैं, जबकि इसके बरअक्स हमारे मुल्क पाकिस्तान में गुज़िश्ता चंद सालों से कोयले का खौफनाक खतरा मंडला रहा है. दुनिया के मौजूद समाज के बाशऊर अफराद और कोयलों को इंतहाई खराब और गंदी तवानाई समझते हैं। इसके अलावा दुनिया भर में इस तवानाई के खिलाफ समाजी तहरीकें चल रही हैं और अब वो काबिल तजदीद और साफ तवानाई को फरोग दे रहे हैं। हमारा मुल्क भी काबिल तजदीद रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी की बहुत ज्यादा सलाहियत रखता है। मिसाल के तौर पर हमारा मुल्क 3 लाख मेगावाट जो है हम विंड से पैदा कर सकते हैं और हजारों मेगावाट जो है सोलर से जो है हम पैदा कर सकते हैं। उसके बावजूद हमारा मुल्क जो है कोल पावर प्लांट्स से बिजली पैदा करने को जो है तरजीह दे रहा है। मैं आपको ये बताना चाहता हूं कि इस मुल्क में 2 किस्म के कोल से बिजली पैदा की जा रही है। एक कोयले को इंपोर्ट करके साहिली इलाकों पर उतार कर और साहिली इलाकों में कोल पावर प्लांट्स लगाकर साहिल की माहौलियात और मेरीन एनवायरनमेंट को तबाह किया जा रहा है, उसको नुकसान पहुंचाया जा रहा है, मैंग्रोव्स के जंगलात को काटा जा रहा है, माहीगिरों के रोजगार को जो है तबाह किया जा रहा है। दूसरी किस्म जो है जो हमारे मुल्क में इंडिजिनस कोल है, खास तौर पर जो है थर से कोयला पैदा करके वहां पर कोल पावर प्लांट लगाकर जो है बिजली पैदा की जा रही है। मैं आपको बताता हूं कि हमारे थर की 20,000 स्क्वायर किलोमीटर जो है एराजी है, जिसमें से 9,000 स्क्वायर किलोमीटर पर जो है वो माइनिंग हो रही है और इसके अलावा कोल पावर प्लांट्स लगाए जा रहे हैं, जिससे मैं समझता हूं अगर ये सारा सिलसिला जारी रहा तो पूरे थर का जो कुदरती हुस्न है वो तबाह बर्बाद हो जाएगा। थर के लोग जो है बेदखल हो जाएंगे अपने तारीखी इलाकों से, अपने तारीखी जमीन से और मारवी का थर जो है वो बिल्कुल जो है वो तबाह हो जाएगा। इसके अलावा थर के अवाम जो है थर कोल पावर प्लांट की वजह से, माइनिंग की वजह से माहौल, रोजगार, सेहत, थर के फितरी हुस्न, थर के मुख्तलिफ रंगारंगी की सकाफत और फितरत को बड़े पैमाने पर जो है नुकसान होगा। ये हकीकत है कि कोल से बिजली पैदा करना जो है दरअसल बिल्कुल इस तरह है कि हम जो है मौत की फैक्ट्रियां जो है वो लगा रहे हैं। एक तरफ हम पाकिस्तान के साहिल में जो है वो मौत की फैक्ट्रियां लगा रहे हैं, दूसरी तरफ जो है हम जो है वो थर में जो है कोल पावर प्लांट के नाम पर जो है हम मौत की फैक्ट्रियां लगा रहे हैं। हमको ये सोचना होगा कि कोयले को इस्तेमाल करके इससे बिजली पैदा करना तरक्की नहीं बल्कि तबाही है। कोयले से बिजली पैदा करने के मंसूबों से माहौलियात और सेहत आमा पर इंतहाई मनफी असरात मुरतब होते हैं। मैं आपको बताना चाहता हूं अगले 30 सालों में कोयले की माइनिंग के लिए 4,000 अरब गैलन पानी इस्तेमाल होगा, जबकि 10 गीगावाट बिजली पैदा करने के लिए कोल पावर प्लांट्स को 8,500 अरब गैलन पानी का इस्तेमाल किया जाएगा। कोयले के इन मंसूबों की वजह से थर में पानी का बहरान और ज्यादा शदीद हो जाएगा, जिससे थर की पूरी वाटर साइकिल तबाह हो जाएगी। थर के लोगों के रोजगार का दारोमदार ज़ेरे जमीन पानी पर है, जिसका जरिया सिर्फ बरसात है। ये साहिली इलाके और थर की तबाही, ये सारा कुछ जो है वो मुल्क की सालमियत और मुल्क की मफाद में जो है किया जा रहा है। मुल्क की मफाद में पहले भी बहुत सारी तबाही आई हैं। डैम बनाकर जो है हमने जो है वो डेल्टा को तबाह किया है, ये भी मुल्क की मफाद में जो हमने किया है। अब हम जो है मुल्क की मफाद में जो एटमी तवानाई से जो है वो बिजली पैदा कर रहे हैं, तो अब जो है हम कोयले से भी बिजली जो पैदा कर रहे हैं, उससे जो माहौल की तबाही होगी, लोगों की तबाही होगी, थर की जो तबाही होगी, वो सारी जो तबाहियां हैं हम मुल्क की मफाद और मुल्क की सालमियत के नाम पर जो है वो कर रहे हैं। साथियों, मुझे सिंध जी सिविल सोसाइटी के यो अर्ज कंदोस तो बाबा हिकड़ी गाल समझो तो ही थर जो कोयलो आहे कारो सोन ना है। यो कारो ज़हर है जो को पूरे थर खे जो सो तबाह करे छॾींदो, पूरे समूरे थर खे जो सो गड़काए छॾींदो। इन करे पाण खे कोयले मां बिजली करण ऐं थर में कोयले जे माइनिंग जे खिलाफ जो सो पाण खे आवाज़ उथारणो पवंदो, छो त हीअ तरक्की न आहे, हीअ तबाही आहे, थर जी तबाही आहे, थर जे माण्हुनि जी तबाही आहे, बल्कि पूरे जो सो सिंध जी तबाही आहे। इन करे ज़रूरत इन ॻाल्हि जी आहे त पाण खे हाणे कोयले मां बिजली पैदा करण या कोयले जे माइनिंग जे खिलाफ जो सो पाण खे मैदान में अचणो पवंदो ऐं हुकूमत खां मुतालबो करणो पवंदो त हाणे जो सो कोयले मां बिजली पैदा करण बंदि कई वञे, कोयले जी माइनिंग जो सो बंदि कई वञे, थर में जेके कोयले जा कारखाना लॻाया पिया वञनि उन्हनि खे फौरी तौर ते जो सो बंदि करे ऐं जो सो रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी खे जो सो तरजीह ॾिनी वञे, उनखे जो सो फ़रोग़ ॾिनो वञे। दूसरी सूरत में अगर हुकूमत कोयले से बिजली पैदा करने से दस्तबरदार नहीं होती है तो हम कोयले के खिलाफ, कोयले से बिजली पैदा करने के खिलाफ, कोयले की माइनिंग के खिलाफ जो है हम अवामी एक्शन लेंगे, जिसमें हम जो है कानूनी जंग भी लड़ेंगे, हम एडवोकेसी भी करेंगे, लॉबिंग भी करेंगे, सेमिनार्स भी करेंगे और पीपल्स ट्रिब्यूनल्स भी करेंगे, अवामी असम्बलियां भी लगाएंगे। इसके अलावा हम रोडों पर भी जो है एहतजाज करेंगे, जिदोजहद करेंगे कोयले के खिलाफ और कोयले के माइनिंग के खिलाफ जो थर को तबाह किया जा रहा है और साहिली इलाकों को जो तबाह किया जा रहा है, इस तबाही के खिलाफ जो है हम मिलकर जो है जिदोजहद करेंगे, तहरीक चलाएंगे और हमारी तहरीक उस वक्त तक जारी रहेगी जब तक हमारी हुकूमत जो है फॉसिल फ्यूल और कोयले से बिजली पैदा करने से दस्तबरदार नहीं होती है और काबिल तजदीद तवानी को फरोग नहीं देती है, उस वक्त तक हम अपनी जिदोजहद को, अपने पब्लिक एक्शंस को जो है वो जारी रखेंगे। मैं आपका ज्यादा वक्त नहीं लेना चाहता हूं, इसलिए मैं तमाम दोस्तों का शुक्रिया अदा करता हूं और लारी का भी शुक्रिया अदा करता हूं कि जिन्होंने एक बहुत अच्छी स्टडी हमें जो है दी है। बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया।
जी थैंक यू शाह साहब, बहुत ज़बरदस्त प्रेजेंटेशन आपने भी दी, लोगों को उठाने की बात भी की, लोगों के साथ ऑर्गेनाइज करने की बात भी की, बहुत ज़बरदस्त प्रेजेंटेशन थी। I would like to request our panelists to please turn your cameras on so that the participants can see who you are. हमारे जो पैनलिस्ट हैं उनसे रिक्वेस्ट करता हूँ कि वो अपने कैमराज ऑन कर लें ताकि जो पार्टिसिपेंट्स हैं वो आपको देख सकें। शाह साहब आप भी कैमरा ऑन कर लें, ज़ुबैर साहब आप भी कैमरा ऑन कर लें। मैं आप लोगों को अनम्यूट भी कर देता हूँ। अब I would like to request all the participants to please send in your questions. If you have anything to ask from our panelists related to third code, related to the study, the floor is open. You can send in your questions. While you send us your questions, I'll ask Madam Hina to give us a brief on her findings on third code. Ms. Hina, अगर आप तैयार हैं तो आपको अनम्यूट हम कर देते हैं और आपका कैमरा भी ऑन कर देते हैं ताकि हम आपको देख भी सकें और आपकी बात भी सुन सकें, if that's okay with you. जी Ms. Hina, the floor is all yours. No issue. आप कैमरे के बगैर भी बात कर सकती हैं।
जी, अस्सलाम वालेकुम। I'm sorry, I think camera won't be suitable at this point since we are working from home. So I think थोड़ा हम work from home modality में it's a Friday afternoon. So anyhow, since मुझे अभी I haven't had a chance to look at the report of Florey, but I mean, I just want to mention that I did some similar work back in 2016 during my PhD. At that time, I was enrolled as a PhD candidate at United Nations Environment Program in collaboration with Chinese Academy of Sciences, Beijing. And that was my PhD thesis in a project where I had to pick up a CPEC project and do some kind of a environmental to study on environmental externalities in any of the CPEC project. So that was the point when I tried to look at what could be feasibly done, not in terms of the issue that is associated with, of course, coal, but also if I would be able to conduct my study or not. And that is one of the basic prerequisites. If I would be able to get the data or not, if I would be able to go and visit the place or not. So being a researcher, the first challenge. And then fortunately, I had contacted the Sindh Anglo Coal Mining Company, who is developing the Thar Coal Block 2, where I had visited for my first survey, where the initial mining had started, and we had focal group discussions with stakeholders, including community representatives, where I witnessed the issues about land resettlement, the issues about their land ownerships, the issues about their livestock, the issues about their inherited land, and their spiritual and their cultural affiliation with the land, and they don't want to give it away. The next phase of my study was done later in the year, where I had conducted a household survey that was to assess the implications of this coal mining on the underground services of water, on which the communities are dependent upon, not only for themselves, but also for their livelihoods, for their livestock, for all that. And knowing that it's already fragile, the Thar is already known to have this crisis of water availability, and also having this issue of saline water and the other associated challenges. So basically, the aim of my research was to assess and to identify these problems. So from the assessment, the baseline was conducted, and then it was from using the primary data and the secondary data from the EIA reports and the strategic EIA report that was done at that time. And based on that, I did the evaluation for the drinking water, for the livestock agriculture purpose, and then we had some really interesting results, based on which I proposed a framework, a policy framework, that is not only for this third block, but also for the future proposed projects of coal and mining, to incorporate all these environmental externalities into their consideration, and not to go forward with developing the other blocks of Thar coal field. So that is exactly what I'm listening and I'm hearing from my other colleagues at the moment, and that is what is relevant to my studies previously. There were two justifications of developing Thar coal at that time. The first one was energy security. So the time when they started, they had this justification of how we have this huge crisis of access to electricity, and then the associated impacts on the sectors of economy, and how we need to catch up with it. The second thing is how at that time it was lots of capital investment involved in renewables. So both of, I think, these factors are not the case at this moment anymore. We are fortunate to see that, you know, now we have surplus of electricity being produced.
Ms. Hina, could you please conclude and like so that we can send your study to the participants as well, and we can open the
Yes.
floor for question and answer.
I'm just trying to conclude in few points that the last thing, and renewables is again cheaper now. So how we can all together build this up to promote renewables and advocate the need not to invest in more coal power plants, and to you know, disallow this air pollution problems and the other environmental issues that are associated with the development. So that is it from my side. I can share my findings once I receive the emails from the host. And then if you have any questions, we can have communication through email. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your valuable input. I will now be handing over the floor to Mr. Azhar Lashari, who is an active member of the Alliance for Climate Justice and Clean Energy, as well as part of Rural Development Policy Institute. Azhar will be handling our question answer session. He will be the moderator for the question answer session. He has noted everyone's questions from the chat window, and he will be assigning those questions to the relevant speaker. Azhar, over to you. And if you could please turn your camera on.
Thank you, Ramesh. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this webinar, this study launch event. And thank to all of those who have put their questions in the chat box. I have taken note of these questions. And the first question is from Kashif Siddiqui. His question is, why Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, and other public and private national and international agencies are silent on such environmental and degradation and non-compliance issues? So the question has basically two aspects. One is regarding the compliance of different standards by the national agencies, and the other part is regarding the international agencies. I think Laurie and Advocate Zubair Ahmed Dabro both can reply these questions, and if you allow me, I can read other questions, and if you want one by one, then this is the first question you can take for response.
I think it would be better if you can assign all the speakers their questions so that they can proceed one by one as they go.
Okay, then let me put all the questions in a single go. The next question is from Mushtaq Gadi, and his question is, why China is so interested to finance coal while it is leading to renewable technologies and replacing coal with clean energy domestically? So at the overseas energy investment, it has other policies. Mushtaq question is regarding different policies of Chinese government regarding energy investment, both in its own country and the other countries. There are a couple of questions from Zofine T. Ibrahim. Her questions are, what did the EIA say about the air quality? That question is definitely to Laurie. Was it factually incorrect, or was it not taken into account? And her last question is on air quality. Why does Thar have poor air quality originally, even before mining started? These are the questions from Zofine, and I think these are expected to be responded by Laurie. And the next question is from Tabby Spence. Her question is, would like to consider approaches for international collaboration on challenging these coal projects. I think it's not question, it's comment. And Alias, his question is, has anyone looked carefully at the friction of costs and benefits as justification by proponents of coal power? These are the questions from participants. And now I request the panelists to please respond these questions.
Laurie, over to you. If you could
Thank
take
you. I think I'll start with those questions, and thank you everyone for dialing in on a Friday afternoon. I'll start with those questions that are closest to the study, and then maybe react a bit to the ones that are further away. So first, what do the environmental impact assessment included in this study? 3 of them have already prepared environmental impact assessments that are publicly available. Many others haven't. Those environmental impact assessments give information on how much air pollution these projects would emit, mainly from the power plant stacks. Even the emissions from mining are poorly reported. But where these studies or reports fall way short is they fail to assess the health impacts of these emissions. So we have applied in our study a very well-established methodology to look at what does this mean in terms of human health impact, and we find this this impact of almost 30,000 deaths from these emissions. But this kind of information that can be assessed based on this emission data is completely missing. And if you look at the guidance from the Pakistani environmental authorities for environmental impact assessment, one of the key things that is mentioned over and over again is impact on human health. The problem is just that this kind of requirement is not being enforced. We also pointed out a couple of elementary errors in the studies that just show that there is no scrutiny. When these studies are sent in, there's no one who goes through them and looks at whether the numbers check out, whether the information being provided to the public checks out. And that's a very poor start for environmental oversight of these projects with massive health impacts. There was a question about using technology to control emissions. All coal-fired power plants have some technology to control emissions. At least the dust emissions, fly ash emissions are controlled in effectively all power plants. It would be just impossible to run these plants without any controls. When the controls fail, it's just dust, fly ash raining from the sky, basically. But the technology that these projects are planning to use is far inferior to the technology that is used in China, that is used in Europe, that is used in new projects in India as well. So if you look at, for example, the sulfur dioxide emissions, the emissions with the largest health impacts, if you're building a new coal-fired power plant in China, you have to meet a standard of 35 milligrams per cubic meter in the flue gas. If you're building a new coal plant in Europe, it's 75. If you're building a new one in India, it's 100. And these plants are far higher, in the region of 300 or more. Similar for nitrogen oxides emissions. So the emissions are multiple times higher, typically 5 to 10 times as high as required in China. And that means that the health impacts also are far higher. And this is really something where Pakistani regulators clearly have far less regard for the health impacts, mitigating the health impacts of these projects, and clearly Chinese companies are happy to make use of this leniency. So they install much lower quality technologies when they're building new coal-fired power plants in Pakistan. Other questions? I just started talking about China. So there was a question about why is China interested in financing coal-fired power plants? Part of it is that because the investment in coal-fired power plants in China has been going down, there's a lot of interest from the state-owned industry that produces the components, that provides the engineering to find business elsewhere. So that's creating a bit of pressure. The other thing is that there is this kind of a mentality in China that when countries develop, they need coal first, and then they can start thinking about clean solutions later, kind of just outdated thinking that is there. But it's also, that just means that when new projects are being planned and negotiated with China, what gets put on the table first is coal. But countries that have clearly indicated that they're not interested in a coal-based electricity system, Chinese companies are also doing renewable energy projects with those. So if there is a signal from the Pakistani side that coal is not what we want to go for, then the Chinese companies and the financiers and so on also have the ability to implement renewable energy projects. As the question kind of alludes to, the big Chinese power companies are the largest renewable energy developers in the world. It's just that they're developing renewable energy at home, and they're developing coal abroad. Why does Thar have poor air quality already? A big part of that is dust emissions, is dust from, you'll know what kind of landscape you have there. So there are very high levels of dust to start with. And on top of that come all the emissions from human activity. So household fuel burning, transport, all the kinds of other activity that you have there already. And the key point is that the mining, the power plants would add more pollution on top of this, and that should just be taken into account in the project planning and in the kind of energy choices that are being made. I think that's most of it. Costs and benefits of coal power. I already said that in countries that have systematically developed renewable energy, India, South Africa, United States, China, many European countries, it costs less to produce power from new renewable energy than from coal, from a new coal-fired power plant, even without taking into account the environmental cost, the climate cost, and so on, the public health cost. But indeed, when you do factor in those things, when you do factor in the human health cost, which imposes a real burden on the economy, that definitely further tilts the balance towards green energy. So we have done studies where we put numbers on that as well. What does it cost to the economy that people are having to take more sick leave because of the impacts of air pollution? When their kids have asthma attacks, they have to take a leave from work and go and take them to the hospital. People suffer strokes or complications from diabetes or chronic respiratory illnesses that reduce their economic productivity, or that make them unable to work at all, or they die during their working life. All of these things impose a burden on the economy. and that is a tangible cost that we are saying if that cost is properly and transparently assessed, that will probably change the decisions about which energy sources are optimal for Pakistan's economic development.
Thank you, Laurie. Zubair Saab, if you would be willing to answer the remaining questions that were directed to you. Let me just unmute you. All right. Zubair Saab, you have to unmute yourself as well.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes. मैं अगर पहले काशिफ साहब का कि काशिफ साहब ने कि why EPA and other agencies are not taking action on non-compliances. So for the Sindh EPA, I can simply say actually they are the partner in crimes. And the simple example is in the Gorano petition. The Gorano petition, the pipeline project is of 37 kilometers, and they required connect an EIA, but the Sindh EPA initially approved it in IEE. And later on, when we approached the court, then they, in a hurry, they conducted EIA, and they hold the public hearing in the vicinity of the power plant where the access is very limited, and then they approved it, the project in the EIA. So there is always a little hope from the Sindh EPA to comply the law and to make sure that the proponents comply with the requirements. On international level, we are hopeful that at international level, with the help of all you friends, these issues will be highlighted, and then the question of Ms. Zofain about the invitation to the Sindh Anglo Mining Company. I guess Mushtaq Saab has already commented on it, because it is just the launching of the report. So we have not invited them, but I think we would welcome if they want to send us any comment, or if they want to refute the report of the Laurie.
Okay, I think there is still a question from Zofine, which I think Laurie has noted it down, and Laurie will like to respond it.
I'd have to unmute you again, Laurie.
Good question for clarification. So the number of people that would be affected by these power plants and mines is much larger than 100,000. We're talking about millions of people who are exposed to additional levels of pollution. 100,000 was the number of people that would be exposed above the World Health Organization guidelines only because of these power plants. So yeah, I think it was important to clarify, because it sounds like if you put those two numbers together, and it sounds like 1/3 of the population immediately next to the plants would die, then that sounds more dramatic than what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is millions of people exposed to an additional level of pollution that increases their risks, and as a result of that increase in health risks, some of them die. It's similar to if all of those people started smoking smoking a few more cigarettes per week or some other long-term health risk.
Thank you, Laurie. Just to make one thing clear, this is a launch of the study, and this study will be made public. So those involved in SCMC will have full capability to go through this report at their own convenience. The idea behind this launch was that we could circulate this amongst like-minded people who care about the environment, people who care about the effects, the harmful effects that people in Thar might suffer from. So the idea being that we want people who are like-minded and want to work on this particular issue to have an understanding of the issue, so that they're equipped with the knowledge that they need to fight Thar coal if they want to. That being said, the study is public and SCMC will have access to it if they want to in the first place. And obviously we will share it online as well. And hopefully they will go through this if they want to. शाह साहब, अगर आपने कुछ कहना है तो आपको भी अनम्यूट कर देते हैं ताकि आपके भी कुछ कंक्लूडिंग रिमार्क्स क्वेश्चंस पे भी दोस्तों को मिल जाएं और कुछ लाइव रिमार्क्स भी मिल जाएं. उसके बाद मिस हनिया इसाद हैं जिनकी कुछ स्टडी है, तो वो भी कुछ हमसे अगर बात कर लें. तो शाह साहब के बाद है मिस हनिया, आपके पास फ्लोर होगा. शाह साहब, ओवर टू यू. शाह साहब, आपको खुद भी अनम्यूट करना पड़ेगा. जी
हो गया अनम्यूट? हाँ,
जी जी हो गया. बिल्कुल बिल्कुल बिल्कुल.
अच्छा, मैं एक तो मैं टेक्निकल लिहाज से बहुत कमज़ोर हूँ, मुझे पता नहीं कि मेरे हवाले से मैसेज में सवाल है या नहीं है, मगर यहाँ पर मैं एक बात ज़रूर कहूँगा कि इंटरेस्ट जो है वो चाइनास के भी इकोनॉमिकली है, और फॉसिल फ्यूल के पीछे सिर्फ चाइना नहीं है बल्कि जो है पूरी ग्लोबल लेवल की जो फॉसिल फ्यूल लॉबिंग है वो चाहते हैं कि जो है ना वो फॉसिल फ्यूल से ये दुनिया जो है वो बाहर न निकले. दूसरी बात, मैं इसमें बिलीव करता हूँ कि EIA की बात हम करते हैं और EIA की बात होती है, पूरी दुनिया में होती है कि EIA एक इंडस्ट्री है और EIA वो करते हैं जो प्राइवेट कंसल्टेंसी कंपनियां होती हैं, उनको अपना बिजनेस करना होता है. और जो अच्छा वो जो पोल्यूशन फैलाते हैं, जो इस किस्म के जो नुकसानदा जो प्रोजेक्ट्स लगाते हैं और EIA भी वो कराते हैं, तो EIA कंपनियों के वो क्लाइंट होते हैं. तो कभी भी EIA कंपनियां जो है अपने क्लाइंट के खिलाफ कोई भी जो है ना ऐसी रिकमेंडेशन ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा उसमें लिटिगेशन की बात करेंगे, मगर कभी भी किसी भी EIA में जो है ना किसी प्रोजेक्ट को जो है ना वो बंद नहीं किया गया है. तो EIA एक इंडस्ट्री है, इसको देखने की ज़रूरत है और इसको इस पर मुकम्मल यकीन करने की भी ज़रूरत नहीं है. और EIA से हम जितना शोर मचा सकते हैं वो अलग बात है, मगर EIA हमें कोई भी जो है ना वो फ़ायदा नहीं देगी. दूसरी बात मैं यहाँ पर ये करना चाहता हूँ कि दुनिया भर में जितने भी इन्वायरमेंट के लॉज बने हुए हैं इनको देखने की ज़रूरत है. इन्वायरमेंट के लॉज जो हैं वो दरअसल हमें ये बताते हैं कि आप जो है ना कितनी पोल्यूशन फैला सकते हैं. वो इन्वायरमेंटल लॉज हमें ये नहीं कहते हैं कि आप पोल्यूशन न फैलाएं, वो हमें एक लिमिट देते हैं. अगर कोई कंपनी उस लिमिट से बाहर जाती है तो उसके ऊपर फाइन लगाया जाता है, और फाइन जो लगाया जाता है वो फाइन इतना होता है कि नुकसान जितना एनवायरनमेंट का होता है उससे फाइन बहुत ही दूर तक जो है कम होता है. तो दुनिया भर में जितने भी इन्वायरमेंटल लॉज हैं वो एनवायरनमेंट और इकोलॉजी के राइट्स को, बल्कि भाई धरती के भी राइट्स होते हैं, पानी के भी राइट्स होते हैं, रिवर्स के भी राइट्स होते हैं, इस तरह लोगों के भी राइट्स होते हैं और नेचर के भी राइट्स होते हैं. तो दुनिया में अभी तक कोई ऐसा एनवायरमेंटल लॉज नहीं बना है जो है नेचर को प्रोटेक्ट कर सके, बल्कि वो हमें रास्ता देंगे कि आप नेचर को इतनी हद तक जो है वो नुकसान दे सकते हैं, मगर आपको ये लॉज मना नहीं करेंगे, रोकेंगे नहीं कि आप जो है ना वो नुकसान नहीं पहुंचा सकते हैं। तो हमें इन बातों को भी सामने रखते हुए हमें अपनी स्ट्रेटजी बनाने की जरूरत है। मैं इस बात में यकीन रखता हूँ कि इस किस्म के जितने भी मेगा प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं, माहौल दुश्मन, अवाम दुश्मन, ये सिर्फ जो है ना वो कब्रों में और कॉन्फ्रेंसों रूम में बैठकर ये मसाइल हल नहीं हो सकेंगे। इसके लिए हमें जो है ना बाहर आना पड़ेगा, रोडों पर आना पड़ेगा। पब्लिक एक्शन के जरिए ही हम जो है इस किस्म के नुकसानदा, अवाम दुश्मन, माल दुश्मन जो है, नेचर दुश्मन प्रोजेक्ट से, मंसूबों से जो है छुटकारा हासिल कर सकते हैं। मेहरबानी।
बहुत शुक्रिया शाह साहब। हानिया, अगर आप बोलने के लिए तैयार हैं तो फिर आपको मैं अनम्यूट कर देता हूँ।
Sure. Hi everyone. My name is Hania, and I just graduated from Yale University with a master's in environmental management. And for my capstone project, I basically wanted to work out the economic feasibility and the environmental feasibility of these CPEC coal power plants. And for that, I did a basic levelized cost of electricity generation comparison of coal in Pakistan through these CPEC projects versus renewable energy in Pakistan. And for coal, I was able to work out that the cost of generation of these CPEC power plants, these CPEC coal power plants, is about 7 to 8 cents per kilowatt hours. Whereas in comparison, for the existing renewable energy that has been installed and is providing to the grid at present, the cost of generation of wind energy is around 15 cents per kilowatt hours, and for solar that is about 13 cents per kilowatt hour. But what was interesting to note is that there is this whole set of newly proposed solar and wind energy that will come online in the future in the next 2 or 3 years maybe. And I looked at the figures and the expenses proposed for those plants, and I was able to work out the cost of generation for those power plants that have been newly proposed and will come online in the future. For solar, the levelized cost of electricity generation was around 4 cents per kilowatt hour, and for wind energy, that was the levelized cost of electricity generation, which is basically maybe I can, if I'm not sure if people are familiar with the concept of levelized cost of electricity generation, but think of it as a tariff that the power producer must charge the energy purchaser to break even for its investment. So for the newly proposed solar, this tariff should be around 3 to 4 cents per kilowatt hour. And for wind energy, this should be around 5 cents. Whereas in comparison, coal energy is around 7 to 8 cents. So we can see that renewable energy is cheaper. And this is without any financial subsidy or aid towards renewable energy. This is purely based on the costs and the expenses that the power producer would incur if they were to install these power plants. And if we factor in the social cost of carbon, or as Laurie mentioned, the cost of harm that these coal power plants are going to be doing to the environment, or the health impacts that they're going to have on the people, the economic cost of that, if we add that to coal, the cost of coal, the levelized cost of electricity generation from coal would go up, even further up. So yeah, in a nutshell, we can see that renewable energy is cheaper than coal, even in Pakistan. And this is mainly owing to the fact that due to the technological revolution and cost of installation and capital costs for these renewable energy power projects have gone down immensely in the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Hania. That was very informative. Laurie, there's some more questions from you, especially from Sabina. She would like to know your methodology and I think there's some other questions, so if you could begin answering those. I have unmuted you.
Yeah, I'm looking at the questions. So the question about the mercury emission difference, right? Are there others? Yeah. So on the mercury emissions, what I said is 20 times, not 200 times. But so there was the consultant that prepared the report simply didn't understand what happens to mercury in a coal-fired boiler. They were assuming that about 98% of the mercury in the coal will be removed from the flue gas by the particle controls, because other heavy metals are embedded in the particles, so they are removed quite effectively by the particle controls. But mercury is mainly emitted as a gas, so the particle controls are not effective or have very limited effectiveness in controlling mercury emissions. So it's just applying a completely wrong calculation to their assumption about how much mercury there will be in the coal. So what I of course don't know exactly how much mercury there will be in the coal. I have the data from the environmental impact assessment on that, but I can just say that if they did the calculation correctly, and this is a very elementary physics issue, they would have found at least 20 times higher mercury emissions.
Are there any other questions related to you? I mean, one more thing regarding the EIAs as well, as per my own study, if you do one visit of Thar, you will understand that they have filled the EIAs with a lot of lies, including the demography of the blocks. So it's only time that will reveal how much they've lied on the EIAs, and hopefully we can use those lies to organize against them, as well as plan some litigation against them as well. So, Azhar Saab, are there any other questions, or should we go towards concluding the event? Azhar Saab, आपको खुद भी unmute करना पड़ेगा.
Yes. There were some questions, a couple of questions, which I have shared privately with Laurie, and Laurie has responded. I'm not sure about the last question. That was from Dr. Shahab. And the question was, can the coal project provide the people of Thar an effective transition? So that question has already been shared with Laurie, if you want to respond it.
Bhagat Saab, that is a very valid point. Land acquisitions का बहुत बड़ा issue है, and while we are working on the environmental aspects of it and financial aspects of it, we are also working on the land acquisition aspect of it as well. I think land displacement is a huge issue, and we all need to highlight that in the media as well as uh, through other means of agitation. They've also lied about how many people will be displaced in their EIAs, which is remarkable because that is such a blatant lie, because they've misquoted the number of people that live in these areas as well. This links to the earlier point that I was making. So I think, Laurie, do you have something else to add? Okay, unmute.
Yeah, thank you. This goes outside of air pollution, but I just want to highlight that if you look at other countries, countries whose economic development relied on coal, be it the United States, United Kingdom, Poland, India, I guess as well, and so on. Usually the coal mining and power generation areas are the least developed, the most underprivileged areas in those countries with the poorest health status. That goes for Wales in the United Kingdom, that goes for the Lausitz region in Eastern Germany, that goes for the Appalachia region in Eastern United States, and so on. So usually this kind of boomtown development has left these regions in a very poor education, health, and so on state, and that's definitely something to look at, because there are a lot of international parallels for this.
Thank you, Laurie. I think we've taken enough time from people who have been here with us since 3:30. I would like to thank you all for joining us. If you haven't sent us your email IDs, please do so. We will be compiling a list of your email addresses so that we can share future correspondence with you. Your comments and questions were well noted, and I hope कि हम सब मिल के इस चीज़ पर कोई अमल कर सकें, कोई लाएअमल तय भी करें और इस इशू को मीडिया में भी रेज करें और जो हमारे पास एवेन्यूज हैं उनमें भी रेज करें, बिकॉज लिटिगेशन अलोन डजंट हेल्प. We need to mobilize and organize our efforts towards an effective strategy against coal. I would like to ask the organizers of today's session to please stay back. Otherwise, thank you all for joining us. Khuda Hafiz, khush rahein, abad rahein. You're welcome. जी सही. सही, आपकी आवाज कम आ रही है, आपको थोड़ा सा ऊंचा बोलना पड़ेगा और या माइक को नजदीक कर लें.
हाँ, ये मेरा बाकी मसला माइक का भी है और यहाँ का नेट का भी बहुत कमजोर है ना इधर. बिल्कुल. यार इतना लंबा सेशन है. ऐसे तो होता है. नहीं, आपने जो ना वो प्रोग्राम के अलावा जो ना एक और शामिल कर दे प्रेजेंटेशन. ये सर मैं बताता हूँ. ये आपको पता है ये उसूल के खिलाफ है. मैं इस पे अभी जो दो चीजें तय होती है ना फिर उसमें ये आप लोग जो ना वो क्या कहते हैं जो ड्राइवर है ना फिर वो उनकी मर्जी जिसको जहाँ देखा पसीना